November 1944. Dawn broke pale and cold over Wisconsin farmland, frost clinging to the fences around Camp McCoy. Inside the wire, more than 3,000 Japanese prisoners of war stirred from their bunks, coughing into the chill, boots scraping across wooden floors. These were men who had once fought under the blazing Pacific sun, men who had faced steel and fire, who had sworn to die rather than surrender. Yet here they were alive, their uniforms replaced with rough denim, their swords long taken away. Lieutenant Masa Fujimoto, once an officer on a Japanese destroyer, tightened his blanket as the guard's whistle cut the air. He had survived the sinking of his ship, endured capture, crossed an ocean in chains. Nothing, however, prepared him for the peculiar strangeness of American captivity. The Americans gave them clean bunks, hot food, medical care when they were sick. It was not kindness exactly. The guards were strict, their rules unforgiving, but it wasn't hatred either. The absence of cruelty was its own kind of shock. That morning, as the prisoners shuffled out for work detail, Fujimoto heard something strange on the air. At first it was faint, like sparrows fluttering beyond the wire. Light, quick, almost musical. His men craned their necks. Then the figures appeared. Not soldiers, not wardens, women. They carried clipboards, baskets, trays of bread still steaming in the cold. They moved briskly across the yard, hair tied back beneath kerchiefs, cheeks flushed pink from the November air. Their laughter drifted through the frost like a song. The Japanese prisoners froze. For men who had been taught that Americans were brutal, monstrous, and crude, the sight was almost unbearable. They had not seen women in years, not since the hunger of war-hollowed villages across Asia. And these women. They were young, healthy, confident. Their beauty struck harder than any weapon. One of Fujimoto's sailors whispered, voice trembling with disbelief, "They send angels to watch us." The others stayed silent, but the thought was shared. Behind barbed wire in the shadow of defeat, the most dangerous thing the men saw was not guns, but the faces of women. At first, the men did not know where to look. Pride demanded silence, but their eyes betrayed them. Corporal Nishida, a farmer's son from Shikoku, muttered just loud enough for Fujimoto to hear, "They are brighter than the sun we knew in Saipan." He shook his head immediately, ashamed by the words, as though beauty itself were treason. But no one mocked him. The truth was too raw. Later that morning, in the mess hall, steaming bowls of stew were set before them. Then it happened again, the sound of laughter. Fujimo turned to see one of the women bending over a prisoner with a bandaged hand. She asked him something in English, too quick to follow. The man nodded mutely, and she smiled anyway. That smile needed no translation. Long after she walked away, the prisoner sat frozen, spoon untouched. When pressed by his comrades, he whispered, "I thought I had forgotten the face of a woman, but I remembered it again." That confession spread like fire through the barracks. These men had been stripped of everything: uniforms, weapons, homeland, honor. Yet here they discovered something they had not realized they'd lost: the ordinary presence of women. Not as mothers, not as wives, not as fading memories, but as living, laughing figures who moved freely among their captors. Days passed, and the women became part of the rhythm of camp life. They carried trays of bread, handed out rations, checked lists with the precision of naval officers. The prisoners began to adjust, but adjustment did not dull the ache. It sharpened it. Some shaved more carefully before roll call. Others stood taller when women passed, reminding themselves they were still men, not just prisoners. Even Nishida, who once trudged through work detail with dull eyes, now sang softly under his breath while stacking firewood. The guards noticed. They smirked at the way hardened soldiers blushed like boys in schoolyards. One sergeant muttered to another, "A smile keeps them more docile than any rifle." And he wasn't wrong. Fujimoto understood the danger. Bayonets had not broken them. Bombs had not broken them. But the laughter of women, that was undoing them piece by piece. Winter melted slowly into spring. The frost gave way to mud, the days lengthened, and with them came a new rhythm inside the wire. Work detail still marched under guard, fences were still mended, lumber still stacked, but beneath it all was something subtler: anticipation. For many, it was the clang of the mess hall bell, the moment when they knew the women would appear to ladle out food. For others, it was the quick flash of a scarf in the wind, the sound of chalk on a board as English lessons began. The Americans had offered language classes, promising better work assignments and even chances to write letters home. Curiosity spread like wildfire. At first, men resisted out of pride. To learn English was to bow. Yet when whispers spread that two of the women would be helping teach, resistance crumbled. On the first day, the benches filled quickly, men sitting stiff and silent, eyes fixed straight ahead. But then the women entered, chalk and notebooks in hand, hair pinned neatly, smiles unguarded. The atmosphere shifted instantly. They began with the alphabet, their voices careful, patient. A man stumbled over a word, cheeks burning. Instead of mocking him, the woman nodded, encouraged, coaxed him forward until he pronounced it correctly. The room filled with hesitant syllables, clumsy sounds that slowly became words. And then the unthinkable, laughter. It began when Nishida mispronounced bread so badly that even he grinned. The teacher laughed, too, not cruelly, but warmly. That laugh rippled through the class like sunlight through clouds. For the first time in months, prisoners allowed themselves to laugh. It was dangerous laughter. Dangerous because it reminded them of home. Dangerous because it pierced the armor of stoicism drilled into them by the imperial code. But it was irresistible. Fujimoto resisted longer than most, jaw clenched, eyes down, insisting to himself this was a trick. Yet each night he caught himself whispering English words under his breath, testing the sounds like forbidden fruit. And one afternoon it happened. As Margaret, the auburn-haired clerk, collected papers from the benches, one sheet slipped from her pile. Fujimoto bent to retrieve it. Their hands brushed. Less than a second, but enough to set his heart pounding like cannon fire. That night, Fujimoto lay awake, staring at the rafters above his bunk. He told himself it was nothing, a scrap of paper, a meaningless accident. Yet he replayed it endlessly, the warmth of her hand, the flicker of her eyes, the way his chest thudded as though he had fought a battle alone. Rage and shame mingled with something far more dangerous, longing. He was not the only one changing. Around him, men began to soften in subtle ways. Soldiers who once moved like machines now adjusted their collars, smoothed their hair, or traded whispered English phrases after lights out. The barracks had once been filled with silence. Now it hummed with murmurs. Simple words carried like charms. Thank you, water, good morning. These men, once sworn to resist until death, now clung to syllables as though each were a fragment of humanity returned. Lieutenant Akabe, the senior officer, saw it too. One evening he rose before the men, his voice hard and sharp. Remember who you are. We are soldiers of the Emperor. These women are not for us. They are weapons, chains. Do not disgrace yourselves by longing for the enemy's kindness. His words struck like iron. Heads bowed. Pride demanded agreement. Yet when the lights dimmed and silence returned, Fujimoto heard the restless shifting of bodies, the muffled sighs of men caught between loyalty and desire. The Americans noticed as well. Guards smirked openly when prisoners straightened at the sight of women. One joked to another, better than barbed wire. A smile holds them tighter than chains. Fujimoto burned with humiliation at overhearing it, yet he could not deny the truth. By summer, the temptation sharpened. The women arrived in lighter dresses, sun hats shading their faces, baskets of bread carried easily on their arms. Heat shimmered across the yard, cicadas buzzing in the grass. It was no longer shock, it was yearning. A loose strand of hair caught in the breeze, a laugh drifting from the infirmary steps. Such tiny details became treasures. The enemy had learned the most subtle form of power, to defeat men not with bullets, but with life itself. The breaking point came one stifling afternoon in July. The sun beat down mercilessly, sweat running into eyes as men hauled crates near the mess hall. Suddenly, a prisoner collapsed, heat exhaustion dropping him into the dust. Guards shouted, unsure whether to drag him or douse him. Then one of the women ran forward. Dark-haired, small in stature, she knelt in the dirt beside him, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, murmuring soft words none of the men understood. The entire yard froze. These prisoners had seen comrades left to die on Pacific beaches. They had seen wounds ignored, pain dismissed as weakness. Yet here the enemy knelt in the dirt, tending a man who only hours before had been another number in a hostile ledger. The prisoner wept openly, whispering in disbelief. Why, why? That question lingered in every barrack that night. Why kindness? Why beauty in a place built for humiliation? For some, the answer was clear. It was a trap, a calculated weapon. For others, it was something else entirely. Proof that America was so abundant, so confident it could afford mercy. And to men raised to see mercy as weakness, that revelation cut deeper than bayonets. Rumors spread. A sailor whispered he had been slipped an extra piece of bread with a wink. Another boasted he had dared say thank you in English and received a smile in return. Each story grew in the telling, becoming myths that unsettled the officers. Akabe raged, accusing his men of disgrace, warning that longing for the enemy was treason against the emperor himself. His fury filled the barracks, but his eyes betrayed unease. He had seen it too, the way men straightened unconsciously when women passed, the way silence fell heavier in their absence than their presence. The Americans logged it clinically. Captain Harris wrote one evening, "The women keep order more effectively than MPs. Strange, but useful. Will continue." To him, it was practical. To the Japanese, it was torment and a gift. Fujimoto knew it could not last. Something inside the wire had already shifted, and no command, no threat could fully undo it. By autumn, the rift was undeniable. Some clung fiercely to duty, repeating Akabe's warnings, vowing they were still samurai, still loyal. Others surrendered quietly to the small mercies of routine, treasuring every accidental touch, every fleeting word in English, every moment when the barbed wire seemed to vanish. Discipline could command their bodies. It could not command their thoughts. It was a boy, barely 19, who finally cracked the wall. One late afternoon, as prisoners hauled crates with the women, he muttered in broken English, "Heavy." The dark-haired clerk smiled gently. "Yes, heavy." Then she added, "Thank you." A single word, simple and small, but it landed like thunder. Every man watching knew a line had been crossed. Akabe raged that night, threatening disgrace, but too many had seen. Too many had felt the ripple of that moment. Fujimoto lay awake long after lights dimmed, staring at the beams of the barracks. He thought of the paper Margaret had dropped, of the mint plant in the infirmary garden, of the way her smile lingered like sunlight. For the first time, he admitted what gnawed at him for months. He no longer knew what it meant to be the enemy. When war ended months later, they returned to Japan changed men. Few spoke of it, but many carried memories sharper than steel or fire. Bread still warm, voices without hatred, the laughter of women who had shown them mercy. And those memories, more than defeat, would haunt them all their lives.